It exists not as a mere statistic, but as a mythological event, a numerical Everest so absurd, so untouchable, that it has long since transcended the sport itself. 100 points. The number hangs in the rafters of basketball history, not stitched on a banner, but seared into the collective consciousness, a permanent and taunting monument to a single night of superhuman achievement. It is the ultimate argument ender, the final, unassailable piece of evidence in any debate about pure, unadulterated offensive dominance. Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game is the North Star of individual sporting accomplishment, a record that feels less like a milestone and more like a typo, a beautiful, glorious error in the ledger of time. But the true power of this record, its enduring and almost maddening allure, lies not in the fact that it was set, but in the growing, unshakable conviction that it will never, ever be matched. It is a relic, frozen in the amber of a bygone era, a perfect storm of a singular, unstoppable force, meeting a set of circumstances that can never be replicated. This is not just the story of one man's greatest night. This is the story of why that night stands alone, an island in the sea of basketball history, forever isolated by the converging tides of time, talent, and the very evolution of the game he once dominated. It is the legend of Wilt, and the letdown for every generational scorer who follows, forever destined to be measured against a summit they cannot reach. To understand the record, one must first understand the man, a physical specimen so far removed from the norm he seemed to be from another species. Wilt Chamberlain stood 7'1", a chiseled 275-pound titan of muscle and athleticism who could outrun guards and outmuscle entire front courts. In an era of limited weight training and questionable nutrition, Wilt was a freak of nature, a precursor to the modern athlete born 2 decades too soon. He wasn't just tall, he was powerful, agile, and possessed a vertical leap that allowed him to play volleyball above the rim. He entered the league not as a project, but as a fully formed destroyer of worlds, a predator unleashed upon a league of unprepared prey. The canvas upon which this masterpiece would be painted was the 1961-62 season, a statistical wonderland that itself feels like a fantasy. The NBA was a league in its adolescence, a run-and-gun circus where defense was often an abstract concept, a polite suggestion lost in the frantic chase for the next shot. The game was played at a breathtaking, almost reckless pace. Teams would routinely launch over 120 shots a game, a number that would give a modern coach an aneurysm. The three-point line was a distant dream of a mad scientist. The entire offensive philosophy was a frenzied dash to the basket, a chaotic ballet of bodies colliding in the paint. It was a league perfectly, almost comically, tailored for a force like Wilt Chamberlain. And he was already a statistical god. He was in the midst of averaging an incomprehensible 50.4 points per game for the entire season. Another record that mocks the very laws of sporting probability. He had already scored 78 points in a triple overtime game earlier that year. The question wasn't if he would score, but how much. The Philadelphia Warriors were a team built to feed the monster, their offensive sets often simplistic, revolving around getting the ball to Wilt near the basket and letting physics take its course. The stage was set. The actor was ready. All that was needed was the right time, the right place, and a perfectly willing, or perhaps helpless, opponent. That opponent would be the New York Knicks on the night of March 2, 1962, in the unlikely cramped confines of the Hershey Sports Arena in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The setting was far from the bright lights of Madison Square Garden. It was a neutral-site game in a hockey rink turned basketball court, played before a sparse crowd of 4,124 fans. There was no national television broadcast. Only a handful of radio stations carried the game. The press corps was minimal. It was, by all accounts, a thoroughly ordinary, almost forgettable regular season affair. And it was in this vacuum of expectation, this quiet, unassuming building, that the most extraordinary individual performance in basketball history was about to erupt. The game did not begin with a thunderous announcement of the historic onslaught to come. The first quarter was merely prolific, a standard night's work for the stilt. Wilt dropped 23 points, a dominant but not yet legendary output. The Knicks, lacking a true center of their own, threw a series of bodies at him. Darryl Imhoff, a rookie who would become the answer to a lifetime of trivia questions, and Cleveland Buckner. They fouled him, they pushed him, they did everything a team of that era knew how to do. It was futile. Wilt was a man playing against boys, scoring with an effortless array of hook shots, finger rolls, and thunderous dunks. There was a sense of inevitability, but the scale of that inevitability was not yet clear. By halftime, the number had swelled to 41 points. The whisperings began to circulate through the small crowd. The Warriors players on the bench started to keep a separate tally, their focus shifting from winning the game, which was never in serious doubt, to feeding the beast. The Knicks, stubborn and embarrassed, began to employ more aggressive and increasingly desperate tactics. They double-teamed him. They hacked him, sending him to the free-throw line, traditionally his one area of weakness. But on this night, even that flaw was transformed into a weapon. Wilt, a career 51% free-throw shooter, was uncharacteristically sharp, finding a rhythm from the charity stripe that added another layer of inevitability to the proceedings. The third quarter was a symphony of force-fed offense. The Warriors, now fully cognizant of the history unfolding before them, abandoned any pretense of a complex playbook. Their strategy became breathtakingly simple. Get the ball to Wilt. Every possession. Every time down the floor. Guards would dribble past open shots to force entry passes. The game warped around his singular pursuit. He was a black hole of offensive production, and the Knicks were being pulled into his gravitational field, helpless to escape. As the quarter ended, Chamberlain had amassed 69 points. The record of 78 was in sight. But Wilt and his teammates were now looking beyond that. The fourth quarter descended from a basketball game into a piece of performance art, a bizarre and frantic quest. The Knicks, in a final act of defiance, began to stall on offense, holding the ball for minutes at a time to keep it out of Wilt's hands. It was a strategy born of pure spite, an attempt to stall history through boredom. In response, the Warriors began fouling the Knicks intentionally, a brazen and calculated gambit to get the ball back more quickly. The game's integrity was collapsing under the weight of one man's stat line. The final minutes were a whirlwind. Wilt was stuck at 98 points, the basket seemingly shrinking, the entire Knicks team clinging to him like barnacles on a battleship. Then, with just 46 seconds remaining, came the shot. A feed from Joe Ruklick deep in the post. Wilt, smothered, turned and launched a short, awkward shot. It was not a thing of beauty. It was not a graceful skyhook or a powerful dunk. It was a desperate heave, the basketball equivalent of a shove in a crowded room. The ball kissed off the glass and dropped through the net. The sparse crowd erupted. Teammates mobbed him. The game was stopped as fans stormed the court. The official statistician, Harvey Pollack, famously scribbled 100 on a piece of paper and handed it to Chamberlain, creating the most iconic photograph in NBA history. The deed was done. The unbreakable had been broken, and in its place, something new, something permanent, was born. The letdown for every generation that follows is not a failure of talent, but a failure of context. Wilt's 100 points was not a product of a single variable, but a confluence of factors that aligned for one perfect night and then scattered to the winds of history, never to be gathered again. The first and most formidable barrier is the very architecture of the modern game. The 1961-62 season was a track meet. The average number of possessions per team per game was a staggering 126. In today's NBA, that number hovers around 100 and often dips lower in the playoffs. 26 fewer possessions is an eternity of lost opportunity. For a scorer, it's the difference between taking 40 shots and taking 60. The math is simple, brutal, and unforgiving. The pace was a function of a distinct lack of strategic sophistication. There was no complex defensive scheming, no zone principles lurking to disrupt the rhythm. Defenses were primarily man-to-man, and the concept of loading up on a superstar was in its infancy. The Knicks had no answer for Wilt, but the modern NBA is built on designing answers. Today, a player approaching 50 points at halftime would be met with a defensive onslaught in the second half, unlike anything seen in 1962. He would be double-teamed the moment he crossed half-court. He would be trapped in the post. Opposing coaches would employ junk defenses, box and ones, triangle and twos, designed with the sole purpose of wrenching the ball from his hands. The ball itself would be pressured relentlessly, denying the entry passes that were the lifeblood of Wilt's record. Furthermore, the physical and strategic context is irrevocably altered. The three-point line, introduced in 1979, has fundamentally warped the geometry of the court. It has spaced the floor, pulling shot blockers away from the basket, but it has also redistributed offensive priorities. A team's offensive energy is now spent creating open looks from beyond the arc, the most efficient shot in the game. The idea of a team funneling 63 shots to a single post player, as the Warriors did for Wilt, is not just antiquated. It is basketball malpractice. A coach who attempted it would be fired before the final buzzer. The game is now a symphony of motion, ball movement, and three-point shooting. A beautiful complexity that nonetheless closes the door on the kind of monolithic, single-minded assault Wilt mounted. Even the role of the superstar has changed. The modern superstar is a brand, a corporation, steeped in the culture of load management and perpetual media scrutiny. The pressure to be a good teammate, to share the spotlight, to play the right way, is immense. A player today, even one as gifted as a Kevin Durant or a Joel Embiid, would face a torrent of criticism for such a blatant pursuit of individual glory. The backlash would be swift and merciless, from the media, from fans, and likely from within his own locker room. The unspoken agreement that allowed the Warriors to turn a game into a personal scoring quest for Wilt simply does not exist in the hyper-analytic, team-first ethos of the 21st century NBA. The record's immortality is further cemented by the near misses of the modern era, attempts that only serve to highlight the sheer impossibility of the task. These are the ghosts that haunt the record books, the evidence of what it takes to even approach the summit. Kobe Bryant's magnificent 81-point game against the Toronto Raptors in 2006 is the closest anyone has come in the modern televised era. It was a masterpiece of skill, will, and shot-making virtuosity, a performance that required 46 shots and 20 free throws. And yet, it was still 19 points short. 19 points is an all-star's entire night, a margin so vast it feels like a different sport. Devin Booker's 70-point game in 2017 is another telling case study. A phenomenal display of scoring talent from a young phenom, yet it was achieved in a losing effort with his Phoenix Suns deliberately fouling in the final minutes to stop the clock and get their star more possessions. A clear and somewhat controversial echo of the Warriors' tactics in Hershey. Even with this managerial assistance, Booker finished 30 points shy. These heroic efforts do not chip away at the record. They build a higher wall around it. They prove that even when a player enters a state of transcendental hot-handedness, when every contested jumper falls and the defense has no answers, the ceiling in the modern game appears to be the low to mid-80s. The final, insurmountable 15-20 points exist in a stratosphere that the contemporary pace, defense, and style of play simply cannot access. Then there is the man himself. Wilt Chamberlain was not just a volume scorer, he was the most efficient scorer of his era. He shot 54% from the field that season, an astronomical figure at the time. To score 100 points on 63 shots is a testament to that efficiency. For a modern player to attempt a similar volume, they would need to maintain an unsustainable, superhuman level of efficiency against defenses far more sophisticated than anything Wilt faced. The physical and mental toll of such a carry job is incomprehensible. The game is faster, the players are stronger, the travel is more grueling. The sheer exhaustion of having the entire offensive ecosystem of a team rest on your shoulders for 48 minutes, while being the focal point of every defensive adjustment, would break most players long before they sniffed triple digits. So, what remains of that night in Hershey? It is not just a record, it is a fossil, a perfect preserved specimen of a different basketball world. It is the ultimate you-had-to-be-there story, made more poignant by the fact that almost nobody was, and even if they were, they witnessed an event that can never truly be understood outside of its time. The legend of Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game is not merely one of individual greatness, but of a unique collision between a Colossus and a moment in time that allowed for such a feat. The letdown is for every prodigy who follows, every scoring savant who lights up the league and prompts the inevitable, hopeful question, can he score 100? The answer, whispered by the ghosts of Hershey, is a resounding and final no. Wilt's legacy is complex, a man often defined by his stats more than his championships, a figure of almost mythical proportions whose reality has been blurred by the sheer volume of his accomplishments. But the 100-point game cuts through all of that. It is simple, stark, and undeniable. It is the number that defines him and the number that defies everyone else. It stands as a monument not only to what one man can do, but to how much the world around him can change, leaving his greatest achievement isolated on a lonely peak, visible to all but forever out of reach. The game evolved, the sport grew up, and it left its most sacred record behind. A beautiful, untouchable, and permanent anachronism.